The year is 732. Europe holds its breath. From the windswept plains of Aquitaine to the forested hills of Bavaria, rumors swirl like smoke of a foreign army clad in desert robes, bearing curved swords. Marching under the banner of a prophet from distant sands, the Muslims have crossed the mountains. The Umayyad Caliphate, rulers of lands stretching from Morocco to the rivers of Central Asia, have surged across the Strait of Gibraltar and torn Iberia from the hands of the Visigoths. Now they stand poised to strike deeper. And yet, in the face of this new empire, a name will rise from the ashes of old Rome. Not from Byzantium, not from Constantinople, but from the thick forests of Francia, a name few in the Muslim world have ever spoken, a man whose legacy will birth an empire not of marble columns and aqueducts, but of iron will and Christian fire. Charles Martel, a Frank, a warlord, a hammer, and in the quiet meadows outside the town of Tours, he waits. What followed would not only shape the future of Europe, it would reshape the meaning of Rome itself. Part 1. The Dust of Rome. The Rise of the Franks. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, the continent fractured into chaos. Warlords, petty kings, and barbarian generals fought over the ruins of imperial provinces. One such group, the Visigoths, settled in what is now Spain. Another, the Ostrogoths, established dominion over Italy. The Franks, however, took the lands of Roman Gaul, modern-day France, and began laying down roots that would outlast them all. But it was not the Romans who taught the Franks governance. It was necessity. By the 8th century, Francia was a kingdom in name but a battlefield in function. The Merovingian kings were little more than figureheads, long-haired nobles with divine claims, but little authority. Real power lay in the hands of the mayor of the palace, an office meant to serve the king, but in practice, ruled in his stead. Charles Martel was one such mayor. His title was humble. His ambition was not. When the Umayyads crushed the Visigoths and stormed into Iberia, it sent shockwaves across Christendom. In just a matter of years, the Caliphate had turned the once mighty Gothic kingdom into a provincial outpost. Their cavalry thundered across the Pyrenees. They raided deep into Aquitaine. Cities burned. Nobles fled. And many feared the fate of Spain would soon befall all of Europe. But Charles Martel was not afraid. He rallied the Frankish nobles. He raised an army of seasoned warriors and peasant levies alike. And in 732, he met the Umayyads at Tours. History remembers this battle as a turning point, the moment when the Muslim advance was checked in Western Europe. But it was not a grand clash of civilizations. There were no speeches from mountaintops or holy relics brandished by priests. It was cold, it was brutal, and it was fought in silence among the trees. Charles's men held the line. When the Umayyads charged, they broke against a wall of northern shields and steel, and in the chaos, their general Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi was killed. The Caliphate retreated. Charles Martel had done the unthinkable. A Christian army had stopped the greatest Islamic empire the world had ever known. The hammer had struck, and Europe rang with the echo. This victory did not make Charles a king, but it made him something greater, the father of a new order. From that moment on, a slow but unstoppable tide began rising in the heart of Europe. Martel's son, Pepin the Short, took the title of king and sealed his legitimacy not through conquest but consecration. He made a pact with the church. In exchange for military protection, he gifted Pope Stephen II control over territories seized from the Lombards in Italy. The Papal States were born. For the first time in history, the Pope was not just a spiritual leader. He was a temporal ruler. This fusion of faith and power would become the blueprint for an empire that had not yet been declared, but was already taking form in silence. Pepin died in 768, and his son was named Charlemagne. The man known to history as Charlemagne Charles the Great was not born into greatness, but into conflict. Upon Pepin's death, Frankish law demanded that the kingdom be divided equally between his sons, Charlemagne and his younger brother Carloman. This was the Frankish tradition, a safeguard against dynastic collapse, but it was also a recipe for civil war, rival kings, shared borders, uneasy alliances. The seeds of betrayal were sown in every charter and royal decree. At first, peace held. Barely, but then, in a twist so dramatic it could have been lifted from ancient theater, Carloman died. The cause, not battle, not poison, not treason. A sudden nosebleed or so, the chroniclers claimed, perhaps divine intervention, perhaps political convenience. Whatever the truth, the consequence was unmistakable. Charlemagne ruled alone, and with that, a new king stood unopposed at the helm of the Frankish kingdom, no longer bound by shared rule. He unleashed his ambitions. He waged war with astonishing speed and ferocity. The Lombards in Italy fell. The Saxons in the north were beaten and baptized often at sword point. The Avars, a nomadic threat from the east, were shattered. His army swept across Europe like a tide of iron and prayer. But Charlemagne was more than just a warlord. He understood something few of his contemporaries did. Power alone is not enough. To last, it must be sanctified. To that end, he fostered alliances with bishops, standardized laws, minted coins bearing his image, and summoned scholars from across the known world. He invited an English monk named Alcuin to his court and began what we now call the Carolingian Renaissance, a revival of classical learning, writing, and culture. He did not just conquer, he built. He did not just rule, he imagined. And in 799, his most audacious chapter began, not on the battlefield, but in the crumbling heart of what had once been imperial Rome, the Pope's desperation. Pope Leo III was in trouble. He had been elected amid controversy, a commoner with no powerful Roman family behind him. He lacked the noble pedigree expected of a pontiff, and his enemies, many of them from the Roman aristocracy, wasted no time. They accused him of perjury, adultery, and heresy. A mob attacked him in the streets. They tried to blind him, to cut out his tongue. He fled Rome. He had only one hope: Charlemagne. The Frankish king answered the call. He restored Leo to the papal throne, not with diplomacy, but with soldiers. Once again, the Franks had come to the aid of the church, and this time, the church would repay the favor on Christmas Day in the year 800, as Charlemagne knelt in prayer in the ancient Basilica of St. Peter. Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head and declared him Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans. The congregation gasped. For the first time in over 3 centuries, a man in Western Europe had claimed the imperial title, and not just any man, a Frankish king, a Germanic warrior, a ruler who spoke a barbarian tongue. The implications were seismic. A second Rome, or a new one. The Roman Empire, technically, still existed. Its capital had moved east to Constantinople. Its emperor, at the time, was Empress Irene, who ruled in her son's name before seizing power for herself. To Leo, a woman had no place on the imperial throne. The idea that she could rule the Christian world even from a glittering capital like Constantinople was intolerable. So he took matters into his own hands by crowning Charlemagne. Pope Leo III wasn't just recognizing a powerful ally, he was rewriting history. He was declaring that the true legacy of Rome now lived in the West in the halls of Aachen, under the rule of a Germanic king. It was a theological coup, a political betrayal, a spiritual reordering of the world, and it changed everything. Charlemagne, for his part, was reportedly surprised by the coronation. Some claim he would not have entered the church had he known what Leo intended. But once the crown was on his head, he wore it with purpose. He began calling himself Emperor of the Romans. In his charters and letters, he demanded recognition from the Byzantine court, and though they eventually conceded grudgingly, the fracture was permanent. There were now two Romes, one of marble and mosaics in the east, and one of sword and scripture in the west. But unlike the unified might of Augustus or Constantine, Charlemagne's empire was bound by the frailty of feudalism. When he died in 814, the Frankish tradition reasserted itself. His grand empire was divided among his heirs. Over the next century, it splintered. Petty kings clawed for power. Nobles defied their monarchs. And the imperial title, once a symbol of divine order, became little more than a political bargaining chip. By the mid-900s, the idea of a Western Roman Empire was nearly dead. And then came Otto. By the 10th century, Europe had regressed into a patchwork of feuding lords and fractured kingdoms. The legacy of Charlemagne had faded into legend, his once mighty realm eroded by division and dynastic squabbles. Francia had split into eastern and western halves, precursors to modern Germany and France, and while the West fell into chaos, the East, known as East Francia, began to forge a different destiny. Its people spoke a harsh, guttural language. Its kings were not crowned with Roman laurels, but raised on the shields of dukes. And yet, it was here that a new contender would emerge to claim the imperial mantle once again. His name was Otto, Duke of Saxony, son of Henry the Fowler, and ruler of the East Frankish realm. Otto was born into disorder. His father had secured the throne through shrewd diplomacy, not inheritance. And Otto's own ascension in 936 was met with suspicion. The nobility grumbled. The dukes whispered. They remembered a time when the king's power was balanced, not absolute. But Otto had no intention of being balanced. From the moment of his coronation in Aachen, the symbolic capital of Charlemagne, Otto made clear that he ruled not by consensus, but by command, and those who defied him would face not negotiations but war. In 937, a coalition of disgruntled nobles and regional dukes rose against him. They invited foreign armies from West Francia to intervene. Civil war loomed, but Otto struck with terrifying efficiency. His forces crushed the rebellion. His enemies were exiled or executed, and from the ashes, a new monarchy rose, not elective in spirit, but imperial in ambition. Then came Italy. Rome reawakens. In 951, Otto invaded northern Italy under the pretext of defending a disputed royal marriage. In truth, he had much grander ambitions. Italy was still a fragmented land, but its cities, especially Rome, remained potent symbols. Whoever controlled Rome could, in theory, control the church, and whoever controlled the church could claim divine sanction for anything. Otto's Italian campaign was swift. He defeated the local warlords, including Berengardua, and made himself king of Italy. But Berengar would not go quietly. He regrouped and laid siege to Rome itself in the late 950s, and Pope John XII panicked and besieged. did what desperate pontiffs had done before. He called for help. He called Otto. The Saxon king marched south once more, scattering Berengar's forces and entering Rome as a liberator. On the 2nd of February, 962, Pope John XII crowned him Imperator Romanorum, reviving in full form the title of Roman Emperor in the West. The symbolism was impossible to miss: a Germanic king, crowned in Rome, holding sway over both northern Europe and Italy. A man with the military strength of Charlemagne and now with the church's blessing. But this was no simple repeat of history. Otto was not Charlemagne, and Pope John XII was certainly no Leo III. The alliance between throne and altar would unravel faster than anyone expected. The break between crown and mitre. Within a year of Otto's coronation, relations with the Pope collapsed. Otto had discovered that John XII was conspiring with Berengar and his allies, even as he wore the papal robes. Worse still, the pontiff was widely seen, even by chroniclers of the time, as corrupt, debauched, and dangerously independent. Otto acted with cold resolve. In 963, he convened a synod of bishops in Rome. They declared Pope John unfit to rule and deposed him. A new pope, Leo VIII, was installed under Otto's protection. It was a shocking precedent. For the first time in Western history, an emperor had removed a pope and appointed a successor. The implications were enormous. The church, once the crowner of kings, had become subject to the king's justice. From this moment forward, the question of who held supremacy, pope or emperor, would dominate European politics for centuries. Otto knew he had crossed the line, but he did not flinch. To secure his legacy, he arranged for his son, Otto II, to be crowned co-emperor in 967. The dynasty was now secured. The title would pass from father to son not just by sword, but by sacred ritual. And yet, the wounds inflicted on the papacy would fester, foundations laid in conflict. Though Otto's empire mirrored Charlemagne's in territory and ceremony, it was fundamentally different in structure. Otto's dominion, often referred to as the Ottonian Empire, was built not on sprawling conquest, but on delicate alliances. He granted duchies to loyal nobles. He installed bishops as princes. He expected obedience and gave privilege in return. The imperial crown was now back in the West, but it rested on unstable ground. When Otto II succeeded his father, the empire trembled. And when Otto III came to power, he tried to reverse course, forging closer ties with the church, promoting Roman traditions, and even attempting to build a new capital at Rome itself. But he died young, and the dream died with him. The idea of a Holy Roman Empire still lingered, but it had not yet found its true voice. That voice would come not with peace, but with fire, not with coronation, but confrontation. In the year 1152, a man named Frederick was elected King of the Romans. He bore the nickname Barbarossa Redbeard, and he would be the one to take the empire out of myth and legend and burn it into the stone of European history. Frederick Barbarossa inherited a crown in crisis. The legacy of Otto had crumbled. The authority of emperors had waned. Local dukes ruled their lands like kings. And the church, once beaten into submission, had grown bold again. The Second Crusade had ended in failure. The people of Rome had thrown out the Pope. Italy was in rebellion. The empire was vast in name, but hollow in reality. Frederick saw only opportunity. He believed in a vision few dared to articulate, a revival of imperial glory, not just in power, but in the sacred sense of divine order. For Frederick, the title Roman Emperor was not a relic. it was a calling. But the road to empire began not with triumph, but humiliation, the dance of thrones and thrones of dust. In 1153, Pope Eugen III, besieged and desperate, asked for aid. In return, he promised Frederick the greatest reward he could offer, a coronation, a true one. In Rome, in the eyes of God, Frederick agreed. He marched south the following year, but the Pope died before he arrived. His successor, Adrian IV, renewed the promise, but when Frederick arrived in Rome in 1155, something went terribly wrong. Tradition demanded that emperors show humility before the Pope. They had to lead the Pope's horse into the city, a symbolic act of submission. Frederick refused. He was a king, not a servant. Adrian, furious, canceled the coronation on the spot. The two men clashed. Threats were exchanged, and only after a tense negotiation and a quiet act of penance did Adrian finally place the crown on Frederick's head. Even then, the streets of Rome erupted into revolt. The newly crowned emperor spent his first day in power putting down an uprising soaked in blood, not incense. This was not Charlemagne's Rome, and Frederick knew it. A holy empire by decree. The friction between throne and altar reached its breaking point in 1157. In response to papal letters demanding obedience letters that all but threatened to revoke his crown, Frederick made a stunning declaration. He proclaimed his realm to be the Holy Empire. It was not the Pope who made it holy. It was not the church that gave it purpose. It was the emperor himself chosen by God, not by bishops. From that point onward, every ruler who bore the imperial crown was to be known not merely as Imperator Romanorum, but as Holy Roman Emperor. A new myth was born, one that combined the Roman legacy of law and order, the Christian vision of divine kingship, and the Germanic traditions of fealty and strength. But it was a fragile myth. The nobles of Germany still held power. The Pope still whispered threats. Italy remained rebellious. And worst of all, the empire was still elective, not hereditary. Future emperors would need to court, bribe, or intimidate the prince-electors who held the keys to the crown. Still, Barbarossa had done it. He had named the unnameable, created the uncreated. For centuries, men had ruled in the shadow of Rome. Frederick dared to rule as Rome reborn, between two thrones. The Holy Roman Empire was never a state like the Roman Republic or Byzantium. It was a confederation of kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, and free cities, united by fealty to a crown that hovered above them all. It had no permanent capital. Its language was not Latin, but a dozen Germanic dialects. Its emperors were rarely crowned by popes after Barbarossa. And yet, it endured. Because the Holy Roman Empire was not built on armies or cities, it was built on ideas. The idea that Christendom needed a protector, that Europe needed an emperor, that Rome had not truly fallen, only transformed. For centuries, emperors and popes would war, reconcile, and war again over the right to rule. The investiture controversy in the 11th century, the Great Interregnum in the 13th, the Reformation in the 16th, but through it all, the Holy Roman Empire persisted. Its borders changed, its power waxed and waned, but the idea remained: a crown made not of gold, but of memory. It would be tempting to think of the Holy Roman Empire as a proper successor to Rome as a state forged by conquest, ruled from a single capital, organized beneath one central government, but that was never its nature. The Holy Roman Empire was never truly Roman. rarely holy, and increasingly over time, not much of an empire. Yet it lasted for over 800 years. And that, in itself, is a paradox worth exploring. The fragmented giant. After Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Empire drifted in and out of relevance like a ghost in the corridors of European power. Its emperors were often formidable in name, but constrained by regional lords. Its borders were porous, its authority contested, its reach inconsistent, and yet this very decentralization, the thing that made it weak, also made it survivable, because it was not tied to the fate of a single city, like Rome, nor to a single family, like the Caesars, nor to a rigid ideology. The Holy Roman Empire was adaptable, a living patchwork. Its emperor was more a mediator than monarch, its institutions loose but persistent, its culture layered Roman legalism, Christian morality, Germanic feudalism. It became a canvas upon which different powers painted their ambitions, the Reformation and the breaking of unity. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. What followed would crack the Holy Roman Empire down the middle. Protestant princes rejected the authority of Rome not just spiritually, but politically. A religious civil war engulfed the empire. Catholics and Protestants burned each other's cities. Alliances were made and broken. The emperor's attempts to enforce unity failed again and again. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 tried to settle the issue with the formula cuius regio, eius religio, whose realm, his religion. But it was a bandage on a gaping wound. By the time the 30 Years' War erupted in 1618, the Holy Roman Empire was a battlefield. Over 8 million people died across Europe from violence, famine, and disease. Entire regions were depopulated. Some cities lost more than half their population. The emperor remained in Vienna, issuing proclamations that no one followed. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 ended the war and effectively ended the dream of a unified religious empire. From then on, the emperor's role was symbolic, a referee in a game played by others, yet the crown endured because it still represented something powerful, not dominance, but legitimacy, the twilight of the crown. As the 18th century dawned, Europe entered the Age of Enlightenment. Monarchies centralized, bureaucracies expanded. Rationalism replaced divine right, and empires, British, French, Spanish, rose across oceans. The Holy Roman Empire, meanwhile, remained an anachronism, a relic of feudal Europe surrounded by modernizing states. Its last great hope, Joseph II, attempted sweeping reforms in the late 1700s. He tried to centralize the empire, reduce clerical privilege, and unify its laws, but he failed. The old power structures resisted, the nobles balked, the church revolted. Then, in the early 1800s, a new conqueror emerged, not from Germania, not from Rome, from Corsica, Napoleon's final blow. Napoleon Bonaparte, self-declared emperor of the French, swept through Europe like a thunderstorm. He dissolved the ancient institutions of the Holy Roman Empire with the ease of a man brushing dust off his shoulder. The old order was defenseless. In 1806, under pressure from Napoleon's victories and the creation of his Confederation of the Rhine, Francis II, the last Holy Roman Emperor, abdicated. The empire was dead. No armies defended it. No cities mourned it. No one rose to replace it. But perhaps it had already fulfilled its purpose. The empire as echo, Though mocked by some, Voltaire famously called it neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. The Holy Roman Empire shaped the very concept of political legitimacy in the West. It birthed a tradition where crowns were not simply inherited, but validated, where rulers needed both a sword and a sermon, where empire was not merely territory, but narrative, and its echoes remain in modern Germany's federal structure, in the cautious relationship between church and state across Europe, even in the idea that no single nation can claim to be the guardian of civilization, that power must be tempered by law, that unity requires consent. The Holy Roman Empire was never fully real, but its shadow was a ghost of Rome, draped in Christian robes, stitched together by German dukes and papal deals, forged in contradiction and crowned in compromise. And for over 8 centuries, that ghost ruled. Empires fall, not always by fire. Sometimes they fade, like twilight on old stone, their silence louder than their reign.